Good afternoon and welcome back. I hope that you are having a great week so far and that things are continuing to go well for you. We'll give it just a moment for it to try to come back. I think it's been a little bit funny. There we go. All right, so to get started for today, let's go ahead and do a practice question. This connects to what we talked about on Monday's class, where we were starting to get into the role of friendships and communication. So a blank friendship is healthy, but no longer enjoyable. So this would be either A, waiting, B, deviant, C, ideal, or D, problematic. I'll give you a moment to think through this question, and then we'll talk about it together. Anybody who would like some more time on this question? Okay, great. So how many people think this is A, waiting, B, deviant, C, ideal, or D, problematic? So the best answer here is A, waiting. So we used a 2x2 to understand some of the different categories of friendships last class, defined both on whether that friendship is healthy or unhealthy in terms of our psychological and emotional well-being, and also whether or not it's enjoyable or unenjoyable. Are we getting something out of that encounter that we find to be, pleasurable to us? In a waiting friendship, right, it's healthy, there's nothing wrong with it, but maybe you've drifted apart and you don't connect with one another in the same way. You're not getting things out of it. A deviant friendship is neither healthy nor enjoyable. That might be a friendship that started well, but then became toxic and hurtful. An ideal friendship is healthy and meaningful. A problematic friendship is not healthy, but might be enjoyable. It might be one where it's toxic, you have cycles of fighting and disagreement, but it's interesting. So that would fit under that definition. So last class, we talked about the recording and reflection essay and also talked about friendship communication. So I'm continuing to work through and you'll continue to see the grades on some of those assignments come up. Again, I went ahead and talked through some general observations and notes last class about those, the essay assignment. For today, we're going to be talking about the study guide for the second and final exam in the course. As promised, I have study guide and practice questions for you in preparing for that exam so that you know what to expect. And then after that, we'll be getting into family communication, the role of family communication, some guiding theories and ideas to help us to understand how communication occurs in this context. So I wanted to go ahead and share the information here about the final exam. So if you take a look right here, you'll notice on the front page of Canvas that there is a study guide for the final exam. This study guide looks very, very similar to the one that we've used for the midterm exam. So just like last time, you're responsible for knowing the term and being able to provide an example of this term as well. And again, I highly encourage between now and the exam for you to take the time to work through this and perhaps to add in your own definition or give yourself a cheat sheet that'll help you in completing some of that content. I should note here that some of the content, just like last time, are things that we'll be discussing later this week or getting into next week. So we'll be getting into elements of family communication for today. Next week, we're starting to get into the role of professional communication, verbal aggression, and similar related issues. So this is divided chronologically by some of the parts that we've been talking about in this class. So we had our first 4 weeks of the term. During week 5, we had the exam. During week 6, the first week of new content, we were talking about talking and listening. Week 7, we talked about mediated communication. The week before Thanksgiving break, we talked about relationships and relational communication. We're talking about family and friend communication this week. And then next week, our final unit, we'll be talking about interpersonal communication in the workplace and negative patterns of communication. So that would be where I would dedicate most of your time into trying to understand and explore these ideas in more detail. So that's what's essentially covered for this content right here. And then in addition to that, the exam is taken between December 12th through December 14th. So it's just like the midterm in that you have that 72-hour, 3-day window in which you can take it. We do not have a class meeting for the final exam meeting time because I know a lot of people are traveling and I don't think it's sufficient to do face-to-face. Once you choose to take it, again, you have 2 hours to complete it. And again, it's got 25 multiple choice questions, 4 pick 3 short essay questions. Just like last time, I also have a set of practice questions that are good representations and might actually be direct questions that are going to be on the exam itself. So if you go here from the front page of Canvas to the final exam practice questions, you'll notice that there are 5 multiple choice that again represent what you could expect to see on the exam. There are also 2 examples of short essay questions that again look just like the ones that would be on the exam and connect to some of these ideas. As always, if you would like to send me a practice question and see what grade you would receive on that if it was on the exam, you're welcome to do so. During Friday's class, we're also going to do another practice short essay question. So I'll use 20 minutes time on Friday to give you an example question that you can work through, that we can talk about together, that can help you in gearing up for that exam. So again, I wanted to make sure you had the resources to help you in preparing and thinking about this assignment. The other things to know here, so people oftentimes ask, you know, is this exam cumulative? It is, in the sense, again, that everything that we've talked about in the class is building off of things that we've talked about prior, right? We need to understand what the model of communication is in order to understand how it plays out in a family context. So I do encourage you to refresh on some of that material. What I would recommend is an 80-20 split, right? Spend most of your time working through the new concepts and ideas that we've talked about since the previous exam. And then spend about 20% of your time reviewing some of the earlier things. So I don't think it's an efficient use of your time to like reread the wrench chapters from before the midterm, but you might look back through your notes and reflect on some of that material. I'm not going to be asking you super concept heavy questions about material before the exam, but it is a good idea to have that information that'll help you in preparing for the final exam. So got those resources there to help you out in December 12th to 14th. So do take advantage of this time as you're working and preparing for that. To give you a sense of our remaining class meetings and what to expect for the rest of the term, again, we're looking at family communication and family relationships this week. Canvas problem number 7 is due this Sunday, and Canvas problem number 8 is due on December 11th. Those are the final 2. So if you have 6, you're good. If you are doing more than 6, then I'll drop any beyond those 6 that are lower scored. And again, next week we'll be looking at interpersonal communication in work and professional contexts, and then we'll be spending our final class meeting wrapping up the course and doing a prep period for that exam. So looking forward to our last few class meetings. Again, it's the The last day of November, we're really coming pretty close to the end, which means it's also the last day of No Shave November, and I finally get to get some of the Strider stuff off. So hope that things are going well as you're beginning to wrap up and pivot toward the end. And then I took some time on Monday to talk about the extra credit that's with Oregon Rural Action on December 7th from 1 to 2:50. I will have a link for you to attend remotely. I'll also be sharing the room if you'd like to attend face-to-face, and I will also be uploading the recording of that meeting so that you can complete that if you're not able to attend physically for that period of time. Before we get started on new stuff for today, any questions? Great. So to get us started for today, I think it's useful for us to try to define and understand the sort of concept of family, right? In the past, the term family has been used in a lot of contexts to describe a unit or collection of individuals that oftentimes has been developed through culture and through a sense of shared belonging, right? We also know that what family is, how we define family, and what sense family means to us is something that's been hotly contested, it's been discussed, debated, deliberated, and so on. And that the definitions of family have shifted in terms of culture, generational understanding, and so on, right? So we also know that the term family is oftentimes used in a very socially or politically charged way, oftentimes in making claims about issues that might impact a group of people, right? Using family as a way of making a case or argument on a certain position. All that to say, defining and explaining what family is not easy to do. Like friendships, we oftentimes know it when we see it. We know who our friends are. We oftentimes know who we consider to be in our family. One change that we've seen in this regard is that we see the term chosen family being used a lot more to describe people that might not be a blood connection, but might be friends that we consider extremely close and we would define as being a part of our family. So a lot of these changes are shaping the way that we think about this, and family might be something that is a given to us in our experiences growing up and people that we consider having in our lives that are important. So there's a few things that I think, again, within a very open-ended definition, can capture a lot of the ways that we define and think about it. One of them being that it is generally two or more people, right? You and your cells and your body do not make up a family. Rather, your relationships do. My family is very small. It's just my mom, my sister, and I, right? But because it's two or more people, it would be considered family. The connections and tie that constitutes a family is an area where we've seen, again, a lot of these shifts in cultural understanding and generational changes here. One of the ways, of course, that we think about family is in the context of marriage, but that's not always what family means to people. Family, of course, can be connected by blood and blood relatives, but it also is in a lot of cases of adoption, right? An adopted family is just as much a family, and in a lot of film and media representations, there's stories in which an adopted family might mean more than a biological family or biological parents, right? My mom's case, she was adopted, grew up in an adopted family, and had a much closer relationship with them than with biological family. And that's an experience that a lot of people similarly articulate, or choice, right? So again, this idea of chosen family might be a good example of this. In my family, we have a lot of very close friends that we consider a part of our family, and we invite to a lot of major social functions. Family live together or apart by choice or by circumstance. So for a lot of you who might be not from this region, right, you are traveling across distance and spending time away from family, and that's a part of how those family relationships kind of develop. Sometimes, right, you're making choices to live together or apart by choice. For instance, I've talked to some people who say that they want to live just the right distance away from family, such that they can be independent but still have the opportunity to visit and spend time with people that are close to them. Having interaction within family roles is an important element, right? Family roles are not necessarily rigid, mother or father, in the gendered way. Rather, family roles can be based on the specific responsibilities or issues that people see as especially important to that member of the group, right? So for instance, one member may be in charge of helping to manage finances and tasks, right? And we've seen a lot of gender distribution of labor as an example of family roles. Creating and maintaining a common culture is a good example here of furthering how we understand family, right? A lot of the things that we talked about earlier in this course about culture, defining and understanding what culture is, can be used to understand what family means as well. For instance, rules and norms and practices that you do oftentimes without even thinking about it might fit under creating a family's culture. For instance, in my family, whenever we celebrate Christmas, we have a tradition called the Christmas chicken. We have a really silly looking stuffed chicken, and it's our annual gag gift, right? So somebody gets it, and then we wrap it up, re-gift it, and give it to somebody else. So the Christmas chicken goes all the way around the house, and when we get it, we stuff it in a closet and don't remember that we have it until we get to the holidays. So that'd be an example of a common culture. You probably have a lot of cultural practices and things that you do as well that are just habits and behaviors that members of your family are interested in. If your family is really into football and maybe you had like a very big game night to celebrate the Civil War game or something similar. So that would be an example here of developing common culture. There's also an idea of economic cooperation. And again, this is an area where we see a lot of shifts and differences across generations, culture, and context. For example, in the past, it was very common for couples and families to have shared bank accounts and use that information in a shared capacity. The studies are showing that more and more individuals are shifting toward having their own accounts and then using, for instance, paying each other back or using sources like Venmo or Cash App as a way of negotiating and balancing finances. So again, this idea that there's at least some degree of cooperation, maybe it's living in the same household, maybe it's managing some element of finances together, maybe it's requesting some additional support financially if you're going to college. That connects to role of family as well. Not all families, of course, have children, sometimes by choice or circumstance, who do not choose to do so. But that might be, that decision might be a different way that we can understand family roles. Family is defined by boundaries, right? We might have boundaries in terms of what's appropriate to say and do in your family. Maybe you have a relative and you know that talking about political or social issues is just not going to go well, and so you set that boundary with them. Or maybe you're choosing how frequently you talk to family on the phone. That would be an example of setting those kinds of boundaries as well. And then an overall feeling of mutual affection. You love, you support, you appreciate the member of the family. You recognize that maybe not in every moment is that person going to be your favorite person in the world, but overall you feel a sense of camaraderie and close relations with them. Again, very broad definition. It gets at a lot of different parts here, but I think putting these parts together helps us to understand a lot of the family dynamics. So we have another 2x2 and another way that it's visually represented. So what this continuum does is it helps us to understand some of the patterns and ways in which different types of families communicate. And this continuum can be defined in two different areas. The socio-orientation, which refers to the role of power and hierarchy that's occurring in the relationship. So for instance, in a lot of relationships, we might see that there is a very high degree of hierarchy, power, and roles that individuals within a culture might exhibit. Whereas in other cultures, we might see more of a pluralistic or democratic form of engagement. So the other idea here is concept orientation, and concept orientation generally refers to how frequently members of that group participate. Right, so in more of a consensual setting, people are generally talking a lot more. So let's talk through what these four look like a little bit. So on the top left here, we have what's known as a pluralistic approach. Under a pluralistic approach, there's very low socio orientation, but high concept orientation. What this looks like is almost an anarchy when it comes to how family is organized and structured. That we might have teenagers who are openly disagreeing and speaking out against some of the things that their parents say or do. You have people who are very openly talking with one another, right? There's a lot of communication happening, but there isn't necessarily people who are pulling rank and saying, I'm your parent, we're doing this because I said so. In a lot of contexts like that, we see families in which perhaps there's a single parent who openly is talking with members of their family about their relationships and connections to other people. So pluralistic is generally very open and is lacking this sort of structure of power. We also have what's known as a laissez-faire family. So laissez-faire comes from a term meaning hands-off. Laissez-faire is also used in other areas like economics to refer to an economic principle in which people are generally pretty hands-off and say the market can control itself. In the context of a family, it's both low concept orientation, but also low socio orientation. So oftentimes in these settings, people are very independent. They're off doing their own thing, right? So in these types of settings, we get people who might not message or spend time regularly with family. And when they do, maybe they're doing so in a very casual way. Like you meet once a year, you do a reunion or some type of event. And in a lot of these types of families, people are generally focused more on creating friendships and other relationships that form the basis of a connection. In fact, a lot of humor and kind of groundwork from shows like Getting in Schitt's Creek, right? The family is very separated. Humor comes from people from very different walks of life having to connect with one another. Shows like Arrested Development, do a similar approach, right? Where a family is forced to come together, who is generally living apart. So we see this a lot in media as well. Under a consensual approach, we see a family that has hierarchy, but also has open communication. One way of thinking about this is communication within boundaries or constraints. If you, in your household, have, for example, a swear jar, where if you say a swear word, you have to pay money into the jar, that'd be an example of a consensual approach. You're communicating, you're talking, but there are certain lines that you don't cross. And particularly if cultural or religious traditions are important for your group, that would be a common situation in which the consensual style is used. And then in a protective style, there's generally less communication, and what communication there is tends to be a lot more structured and hierarchical. This would be an approach that would generally say children are to be seen, not heard, doesn't really allow for much open dialogue and discussion, but is very concerned with protecting the unit and trying to make the family unit operate in the ways that it should. Right? So I think these help us to contrast and understand some of the methods of communication within these different groups. So a really key idea here that helps us to understand the structure and behaviors of different families is this idea of family systems theory, right? So family systems theory is arguing about the ways in which a family is structured, oftentimes in pretty complex and nuanced ways. If you think about a family, right, and say you're visiting a family of a friend, oftentimes it feels like you're walking into a totally new and foreign environment because you see a whole bunch of people who are talking and relating to each other and sharing inside jokes and occupying different roles. And it can feel a little overwhelming recognizing the complexity and ways that members of the family are going to choose to communicate. I encountered this when I was with my partner's extended family over the Thanksgiving holiday. It was a very big family. There's all sorts of things going on at once, right? People are talking in the dining room. They're playing games down in the basement. They're doing all sorts of things in all these different places. And there's a whole lot going on. So family systems theory argues that we can think about this almost as cogs in a machine, right? Where the different gears are turning and they're allowing this overall unit of family to communicate and engage with one another. So family systems theory is characterized by 7 different parts, and in a little bit, I'll be asking you to explore some of these parts in greater detail. One of the biggest ideas of family systems theory is interdependence, the idea that to some extent with family, we connect, we relate to each other, about a variety of different topics or issues. Again, maybe that's choosing to talk about how college is going for you and sharing some of your social and belonging needs. But it could also be things such as economic and logistical cooperation with other people in the group. There's also this idea of wholeness, right? And I think one of the ways of thinking about this is that we don't miss the forest through the trees. For example, maybe you're visiting a family and you see two siblings who are like intensely arguing and bickering with each other. You might come to the conclusion that they hate each other and that they just have this awful relationship. But you're corrected and learn, no, they actually love each other a lot. They just get into a lot of arguments. This is just what they do, right? So wholeness is about understanding a family system as something that's changing and something that you can't take something out of context to understand, right? You have to look at the bigger picture and how the communications overall happen. Oftentimes, we find ourselves in complex relationships with members of our family that really ebb and flow in days and weeks about different issues. We have patterns and regularities, right? So over time, as part of a family or group, we find ourselves doing certain norms and certain behavior. Again, a good example of this would be something like a swear jar, telling somebody that they shouldn't use certain phrases that are considered to be inappropriate, and establishing those kinds of norms for the group. Very similar to culture in the way that culture has both the formal rules. For instance, maybe you grew up in a household in which people were assigned on a whiteboard in the kitchen which types of chores you had to do. But otherwise, it might be norms. Maybe there's an expectation that you're the one who takes out the garbage, even though it's not written or hard-coded. There's also this idea of interactive complexity. Again, interactive complexity is the range of things that you can do among members of a household or family. One way of thinking about this is if all you can really do is have a reunion every once in a while, that's pretty low complexity. But if you're able to casually chat on the phone, if you're doing something like a group chat through Messenger, or you're choosing to go to a game or do a watch party, right? The greater array of things that you can do, the greater detail and nuance in the family relationships mean a greater degree of interactive complexity. Openness is another important element, right? We can think about this both within the family, but we can also think about how a family might consider itself to be open or closed to outside groups. One example of this is a practice for a lot of holidays, such as Thanksgiving, in which a family with a higher level of openness might be open to inviting individuals who are not a part of that family to participate and have, a warm meal and place that they can be safe, even if they're not considered a member of that family. Complex relationships are another element that I think are pretty important, right? So again, I grew up with therapist parents who always warned me that especially in family contexts, you got to be afraid of the triangle, because oftentimes when you have a group of three, you have this situation that might create a more toxic or negative relationship. For example, maybe Ralph and James gang up on their youngest sister, Shelley, and that could create a negative or hurtful encounter, right? We know that in a lot of family situations, we have these really complex networks and relationships that play out in really different ways. For example, maybe Polly and Shelley are not on speaking terms. Polly, Ralph, and James are on speaking terms, but James is typically the one that's responsible for conveying to Shelley what Polly is thinking and doing. But maybe Polly gets frustrated that Shelley is finding information that James is sharing that Polly thought was setting confidence. And then maybe Ralph is not really included in any of this, has a good relationship with both Shelley and Polly, and doesn't want people to be angry, right? You see a lot of examples like that play out, where there's weird kind of interplay and complexity in how members of household or group relate to one another. So there's also this idea of equifinality, that at the end of the day, families have a lot of differences in the strategies and tactics that they use to achieve what might be the same endpoint. Again, one way of thinking about this is thinking about finances, right? At the end of the day, if you're paying the bill, you might go through that because you have one single shared account that does that. You might have people who are contributing individually to making a payment. There's a lot of different ways that could look, depending on the situation. But the idea that families could reach those goals in very different ways, the idea of equifinality. So I want to share two examples of TV shows that I think do a good job of showing the complexities of family communication. One that gets at the role of cultural and generational differences in families, and one that gets at some of the ways in which rules and norms can shape family behavior. These were shows that ended about 2 or 3 years ago, one of them being Fresh Off the Boat, and the other being One Day at a Time. And as you're watching, I'm going to show some trailers from these. Pay attention to the ways that members of this household are communicating and some of the ways that we could map out and understand these family systems.
That's me, your boy Eddie Wall. Check it. 11 years old and moving from DC to Orlando. He got my eyes, I saw the sign. That's my dad. He loved everything about America. Full on bought into the American dream.
Tell me why we have to move, so your father can own a Subway restaurant.
Called Cattleman's Ranch Steakhouse, and I've grown to love it like the daughter we wish Evan had been.
This is why we left our family and friends.
Exactly.
This is why we left everything we know to come to a place where we know nothing, where humidity is not felt from my hair.
This is my mom. My dad's American dream was her nightmare.
Where are all the customers? There's hardly anyone here, and that table is only drinking water. Hey, why do you not drink beer?
Me, my American dream was to fit in.
Why do all your chefs have black men on them? Victoria, get it out. Come with us. Oh, yes, I need to. Get it out. Do you need these words? I need white people on show. What is this door so excited about? If we get separated, try and join in my family. You will be safe there until I can find you. I miss the Taiwanese wonderful back in DC. They make me feel so calm. This is great.
See, are shooting our local commercial.
Photos ready for coffee.
You look so well, so I am worried about money, and I look at my hair. My hair is terrible.
Company.
You're here now, we have to make the business. Do you think I like pretending Samantha even carrying a baggie of salt food in her hand? No, I don't like this. We all see the food there, it's totally around.
Things on the more celebrity chef Eddie Wong.
You're the one.
So kind of a fun example here, right, of some of the ways in which family communication dynamics play out. So Taiwanese American family, but with generational differences, right? You have the children who are native English speakers who are kind of struggling to fit in and to feel included, who might have some degree of pushback or embarrassment about their cultural background, like the food at lunch, wanting to fit in. You have the kind of differences in how the family members are integrating into society and culture. You have a lot of the drama and conflict that's centering around the differing approaches about integrating into American culture and trying to understand how different members of that family are approaching that in very different ways. So I think it's a good example here of looking at some of the ways that complex family patterns, communication, and relationships might shake out in really different ways. I'll show you a clip here from One Day at a Time as well.
And then maybe you can show me how to play it back.
Your mom's kind of mean. I'm obsessed with her.
We got that Vienna customer Rio one more time.
This is Doyle and Alzheimer's.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Hey, I'm messing with you. She's just racist.
Look at your face. What happened to you?
I'm hanging out with my friends. It's hard to turn it on.
Girl, like, no, doctor, she's not talking.
insist, oh, we already put the roll around on the street there. Okay, not on a plate, but it's a very good pilot. To war, I got hurt. And when I came back, there was some organization set up to help me and other veterans get the help we need.
So again, I think another good example here of a lot of the complexities of family dynamics. One of the things that I noticed here, right, is the use of a consensual family structure. So for instance, when the son says, you know, what's wrong with your face? There's this pushback and saying, well, oh, sorry, I crossed the line. That's inappropriate. It's what my friend said, right? So that'd be an example of establishing certain boundaries. Also negotiating distance, right? Something leaving for college and leaving some of the connections to family and experience of closeness and involvement. Again, some of the generational issues, right? One of the main characters being a veteran and experiencing some of the challenges of integration. Again, there's a lot of shows, films, many of which you probably enjoy that connect to these ideas of family structure, drama, and communication. What happens in most members of groups like this. So what I'd like you to do now is to take some time on your own. And I'd like you to take some time first to think about what family means to you in your own words. You might think about individuals that are close with you or important in the context of your own life. And then thinking about family system theory, if we've been talking about it, I'd like you to pick two characteristics of that theory and to think about some of the ways that these might apply to you. So I'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes on this. once you've wrapped this up, what I'd like you to do is to find somebody else or a group of three to share what you've written here in terms of defining family and the characteristics that you've seen, and then take some notes about what you're seeing as both similar and different. Give you about 2 more minutes to chat and take note of what you're noticing.
Close family around me, or just kind of, kind of thing, or in the middle of the night. I don't, you know, mass. It opens. Yeah.
And finish up your discussion here in this next minute. Some of the things that I heard and noticed both from this and from the morning class. One of them is the openness is pretty commonly talked about, this feeling of being able to really share and disclose a lot of elements of your life. I think is something that we really value from family connections. Oftentimes there's a curve in connecting with a friend and understanding or getting your experience and having the kind of longevity and experience with family that we oftentimes develop over time. I think is a unique thing that we really value those relationships for, right? Well, not true in every cases. A lot of family experiences for us are, or at least feel unconditional, and that can be an incredibly important element of how family members connect. I also noticed the discussion about a lot of activities and things that you might do as part of a family, like delegating and doing tasks. You might think about the communal versus agentic styles that were present in friendships to shape family relationships too. Are they more based on talking and spending time, or are they based more on doing activities, right? Those can be different ways that families and members of families choose to communicate. So appreciate your reflection and observations here and kind of shaping some of these ideas. So to wrap up our discussion for today, talked about some of the ideas of family communication, again, family being a very kind of broad term to define, but the idea of these complex communication exchanges that can happen in a lot of these different groups. A lot of mediated examples, such as film and television, help us to see a lot of the ways that family dynamics play out, including understanding how different cultures communicate about family. And we also looked at family systems theory to understand a lot of the different cogs and parts that shape the complexity of family structures and relationships. So on Friday, we'll be doing a practice short essay question. We'll also be discussing some of the challenges in family relationships, including sibling relationships. So please either email or pass forward your attendance for today. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you again for Friday's class. Thank you.